Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the UNAVSA CPP webinar. My name is Tao Tran from UVSA South, and I am a part of this year's CPP campaign committee. On behalf of the CPP campaign team, I am more than happy to have you all join us here tonight for our first collective philanthropy project webinar tonight. The purpose of the webinar is to educate our constituents and give them a better understanding of this year's beneficiary, which is the Pacific Links Foundation. Throughout tonight's webinar, please feel free to leave questions in the live chat box on the right side of your screen. The CPP campaign team will gather these questions, as well as the questions sent in earlier this week, for a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. I'm honored to have our webinar presenters here with us tonight. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers for the night, Mimi Vu, Director of Advocacy and Partnerships, and Diane Truong, Communication Manager of the Pacific Links Foundation. Ladies, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Sure. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mimi Vu, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Partnerships for Pacific Links Foundation. I've been with Pacific Links now for about 5 years, but I've been living in Vietnam for almost 12 years doing development work in the areas of public health, gender, education, water and sanitation, and overall poverty reduction.
I'm Diane, Communications Manager for Pacific Links Foundation. I first started with Pacific Links around 2011, 2012. And so I've been with them for a while now. I started off as a volunteer. At that time, I was looking for a volunteer opportunity, and my roommate from college, who had been volunteering with them 2 years in Vietnam, she had told me about Pacific Links. I was doing events and things like that, and eventually got more and more involved. And so my role evolves to what I'm doing now. Throughout the webinar, we'll go over the issue of human trafficking, what Pacific Links is doing to end human trafficking, and how you can get involved. So at the start, we want to start with introducing you guys to the issue. So the definition of trafficking that you see here on the slide is from the UN Palomar. And the key thing that you see here is that there's some sort of deceit through use of force or coercion. So basically they're being lied to, or it's not what they're being told that they're going to be doing. So for example, we see a lot of cases where people are being tricked into various job opportunities. So they think they're going for a good opportunity, but ends up not being the case. The issue itself, the global issue, is 40 million people worldwide is in a trafficking situation. Trafficking situation is a $150 billion industry, and is considered the second largest criminal industry after drug trafficking.
So human trafficking in Vietnam. This is one of the biggest issues that affects Vietnam's development. It's literally robbing the country of its future, which is its young people. So as of right now, Vietnam is one of the top source countries in the Asia region and also in Europe for trafficking victims. We are what we call a sending country, meaning our victims get sent out rather than a destination country, meaning we accept victims coming in. So we are set all over the place. The market is huge for the trafficking of Vietnamese, not just women and girls, but also young men and boys. So for example, in the UK, we're #1 for child trafficking victims and #2 for adults, behind Albania. In the last year and a half alone, there have been reported over 3,000 Vietnamese trafficking victims in the UK. About 65% are young men and boys. And of that 65%, about almost 40% are boys, meaning they're under 18. We are probably the top source country for stolen female brides and prostitutes in China. Cambodia, we are one of the top, if not the top source countries for prostitutes and child trafficking victims in Cambodia. Last year, we were the top source country for repatriated born victims in Cambodia. And usually the age range is a bit younger than in China, where they're mainly sent to be brides. So in China, the age range is, I would say, between 14 to 45, whereas in Cambodia, the age range is much younger, about 8 to 15. In Malaysia, we are also #1 for foreign prostitutes, and also brides to be sold on bridal bazaars for Chinese Malaysian men. And in addition to that, we are also the top source country for foreign brides for Taiwan and South Korea. And most of these women are drawn from the same pool of women who would also get trafficked to China, Cambodia, and Malaysia.
As for who is being trafficked, you can see that most of the victims trafficked in Asia are women and girls, and that they're young, and they're being sold into the sex industry at a really young age, so they're teenagers, 12 to 14 years old. To Europe, it's a little bit different. We're seeing a lot more people that are being trafficked to Europe. They're mostly men and boys, and they're most of the time is labor exploitation. So for example, in the UK, a lot of the victims are trafficked to work on cannabis farms. One of the statistics that I always thought was really important to remember is that 60% of traffickers that were arrested were former victims of trafficking. So what that tells us is that it's really important to help assist the victims when they return back to Vietnam to get the help that they need, so that they don't end up going back into that cycle again and perpetuating that cycle and trafficking others.
So who are we, Pacific Links Foundation? So we are an American NGO that was founded in 2001. And what we do is we break the cycle of human trafficking. Our goal, our mission is to prevent the trafficking of vulnerable Vietnamese and also to support victims after they've returned to Vietnam so they can have a better life. We currently work in 15 provinces across Vietnam, and which is quite an achievement because in the country you have to get individual permission from each province and also from the national government in order to work in each province. So most NGOs only stick to Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. But for us, because we work in the rural areas and we work on the border regions where the people are most vulnerable, that's why we're allowed to work in 15 provinces. And hopefully we'll be adding another 5 or 6 provinces to that in the next couple weeks or so. We work, as I mentioned, at the borders of Cambodia, China, and Laos, and also in industrial zones across the country. And we are very strategic on how we work. Basically, we have, based on our experience, and also based on the research done by anti-human trafficking experts, we've identified 5 key factors that influence someone's vulnerability to being trafficked. So we don't go out and run out and break down doors and save people, rescue people in China, guns blazing, all that. What we try to do, because we want long-term impact and long-term effects, is to look at what are the root causes, what are the vulnerability factors, and address those. So we've identified these factors as gender. So whether you're male or female, as you saw in our previous comments, you are vulnerable for being trafficked. Lack of education is another one. Your identity. So are you a migrant worker? Are you an ethnic minority? Those also influence someone's vulnerability to being trafficked. Your economic situation or your poverty level. And also how strong is law enforcement in Vietnam, customs and immigration, border control. So those are the 5 factors, and those are the 5 things that we address in every single one of our programs. Most of our programs address multiple, many of these issues, usually between 3 to 4 of these factors in each program. And we also partner. This is an exceedingly difficult issue to solve that spans, criminal syndicates and old, traditions and cultures that are thousands of years old, and it's also behavioral change. So the solutions are not easy, and we're one small organization that can't do it alone. So we have to have partners, whether it's other NGOs or companies that are investing in Vietnam, the local and international governments, students and schools, and you guys.
So as Mimi mentioned, these are the programs that we have, our key programs. And what we put under prevention is our work with at-risk youth. And then what we have put under protection is our work with trafficking survivors. And we'll be going into more details on each of these programs. So first, this is our scholarship program. It's one of our key programs. The key thing with our scholarship program is we want to keep girls in school who are most at risk of dropping out of school. Because what we see is that when they stay in school, then their likelihood of making more money, but having better economic opportunities, it widens the opportunities for them. And because, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of times people are looking for work, and then that's where the trafficker comes in and offers them opportunity. We want to make sure they're as strong as possible. So one of the key things that is throughout our programs that you'll see is access to education, knowledge, various skills, and also building networks. So in our scholarship program, what we have is it's not just a simple scholarship program. We also make sure that we provide them with everything they need so that they can succeed. So one thing is making sure they get bicycles, because what we see is a lot of times the girls can be walking 5 kilometers, which is really far to go to school and then back again for lunch, which is traditional Vietnam, and then going back to school again. So they could be walking for an hour each way. So we want to give them a bicycle, so that will cut down the commute and also increase their likelihood of going to school and takes out that physical element that's in their way. We also make sure they get the touring that they need. And then what we do is we also do home visits. We keep in contact with the girls and their families. We go to their homes, see how they're doing, and then see if they need any extra support or help, so that if they have any chances of potentially dropping out of school, that we can intervene as soon as possible. We also do family days with the girls, their families, and community members. Throughout each of these events, we talk about human trafficking and the dangers and what you can do to protect yourself and your family and your friends, as well as why school is so important, why they should stay in school. We also have our annual summer camps that we do. What we do is we bring all the girls together. We have a lot of workshops. A lot of them build on different skills. Some examples that we've had in the past is, for example, we've had intro to coding. We've also had like reproductive health, financial literacy. So any skills that would be soft skills that they may not necessarily learn in school, we want to give them that opportunity, because at the end of the day, we feel that the more empowered they are, then hopefully if a trafficker does come by their way, then they can make a good decision and make the right choice and not end up being trafficked. This is our FACT program, and our FACT program, it works with a slightly different population. These are men and women who are working in factories. We go out and we train the workers. We also work with the managers in these factories as well. We want to make sure they understand the risk of human trafficking to them, and then also what they can do to stay safe. What we've seen a lot of times that we've gone to these factories is that people will tell us that they know somebody that has been trafficked. They'll stand up and share stories of whether it's like a sister or a friend that was sitting next to them but that had disappeared. So it's something for them that it is real. And so when we give people this information, it helps them have awareness that they don't end up being trafficked, because the traffickers are recruiting from these factories. So people who already have real jobs, traffickers are coming along and enticing them with quote unquote better opportunities. And that's how people end up being trafficked. Another of our prevention programs is our Adapt Club. So there's a little bit of extension of like our summer camps that we've had. So we build on various leadership skills, also work as an after-school program with the students. We want to make sure that they're able to spread awareness about human trafficking throughout their school communities, but also other issues as well, and building them up so they can be leaders within their own communities. Our vocational training program targets youth that are a little bit older, so they've mostly graduated high school, so older than 18 years old. And again, this goes back to education, making sure they have access. Every program that we sign them up for, we want to make sure they graduate with a degree or a certificate of some sort, so that when they go out and look for work, they have a higher chance of finding work. And then that also opens up their opportunity, so that less likely that they'll be trafficked. We also do outreach events, targeting people who are most at risk for being trafficked. We're currently at various markets. So in northern Vietnam, for example, in the ethnic minority communities where a lot of people are being trafficked from, we go to these markets and we, like the picture here, we talk to the community members. We share information, let them know what's happening. And even at these events, we've had people come up to us and share stories about what happened to somebody they knew that they suspect had been trafficked. We've had people bring someone else that they know to the event because they realized that, their friend or daughter may have been trafficked and that had just gone missing. And we also do these in schools as well. So just really making sure that people who are most at risk of being trafficked, they understand what the risks are out there and that they have the information. So if they need assistance or help, they can reach out to us and know what to do so they can ultimately stay safe. And another program that we have is we work with law enforcement, which is really key. We do a lot of training for law enforcement because a lot of times they have been mandated to do something about trafficking, but they always could use the extra support from us to get more training so they can have a better understanding what trafficking is, how they can be more victim-centered when they're dealing with victims, in terms of better identifying who a victim is.
Okay, so our program. So we start our encounters with trafficking survivors as soon as they cross the border back into Vietnam. One of the programs that first addresses their return is our Returning Initial Support Essentials, or RISE program. And this addresses a number of enforcement aspects. Number two is the general identity. So oftentimes when girls are brought back to the border, especially from China, they are lacking supplies. So for example, if they rescued themselves or escaped from a brothel, oftentimes they jumped out a window or ran out the door, and they are only partially clothed or have no shoes on, or just have been running through the forest for several and don't have any supplies or anything on them. So when they're brought back to the border, oftentimes these are isolated border stations across the Vietnam-China border, where there are no shops, no stores, nothing where the border guards can go and buy supplies for the girls. Number one, what that does is it makes the girl very uncomfortable. She's brought back to the border station. She has to stay there for about a week or so in order to get processed because she has no paperwork. So it takes time for the border guards to pass the information down and get her proper paperwork in. During that time, she needs to shower, she needs change of clothing. And again, it's not easy for the border guards to go out and buy any of that stuff. And also they're lacking the financial resources to do so. In addition to that, a lot of times these border guards are not interview a trafficking survivor, especially scared trafficking survivor. What happens is that sometimes the girl will just refuse to officially claim or acknowledge that she's a trafficking victim because she just wants to go home. Or she won't talk because she's scared of the police or whatever, scared of something that will happen to her, and deny that she's a trafficking victim and not offer up any other information. What we want is for her to feel comfortable enough to say, yes, I am a trafficking victim, because then it means that it's officially on her record, and she's then eligible for all the services, including our shelters, that are available to her. So with our RISE program, it's two parts. Number one is that we train the border guards on how to properly interview and sensitively interview these trafficking survivors. So when in the type of questions that they ask, so instead of saying, "Are you a trafficking victim?" They ask other questions, and from those answers, we can infer whether or not she's a trafficking victim without forcing her to say, "Yes, I am a victim." And number two, we provide RISE packages all across the border stations of China and Laos. Each of these packages contains change of clothing, sanitary napkins, soap, shampoo, a comb, shoes, and information on our shelter. And basically what it does is it allows the girl to, be comfortable during the time that she's being processed, but also for the border guard, in the act of giving her this package, he is also giving her some measure of dignity back. And the act of doing that starts breaking down the wall between the trafficking survivor and the border guard, and starts building up some level of trust between the two sides. We want the girl to feel comfortable enough to acknowledge her status, but also feel comfortable enough to reveal other information that could lead to the rescue of other girls. Because that information is given to the border guards. They then take it officially and directly to the Chinese police, who are then compelled to act and do raids or whatever it takes to rescue the other girls. So our next program in our reintegration portfolio is our compassion homes. And these are long-term reintegration homes for female trafficking survivors in Vietnam. So in the country, there are only 3 long-term reintegration homes. And by long-term, I mean more than 6 months. Anything less than that is a temporary shelter. We have 2 of them, one on the Chinese border in La Pai province, and An Giang province on the Cambodian border. And then the other one is run by the Hanoi Women's Union in Hanoi. The women who go to their shelters stay on average about 6 months, whereas the girls who go to our shelters stay between 2 to 3 years. What it is that we basically become the girls' second families. After they return from the border, they come and visit our shelters with their families so that we can explain to the parents and to the girls what are the benefits for having her leave her home again, but coming to live with us. She will get educated. She will get healthcare. She will get the safe housing. She'll get the proper emotional, mental support that will encourage her and motivate her to succeed in life and not sink into depression or look at herself as a victim for the rest of her life. We provide them with art therapy, dance therapy, family support if the family needs it, and then we also help them with job placements afterwards. This is very key because after a young woman returns from being trafficked abroad, we're in Vietnam, we're in Asia, so this is still a very conservative society, and it's even more difficult for ethnic minorities. There's a lot of stigma associated with going to China or Laos or Cambodia and being a quote-unquote bad girl who went versus a trafficking victim. And so they need the young women, in order to get past this trauma and survive and thrive, they need a safe environment where they can just focus on their futures and not have to worry about what the rest of society thinks about them. That's what's so important, because it really provides them with a safe space where all they can do is just focus on their futures. The way that they can be successful in Vietnam is to go to school, a career, or develop a career where they can earn a proper salary to take care of their families and themselves. This, if they're able to have a career, this not only gives them power within their own families because they become then the breadwinner, but it also lifts them in society. Again, we're Asian, this is Vietnam, and the value of someone is how much you can bring to the table to support your family and support your community. And if a woman is successful, is able to bring, financial support, she is then viewed as a successful person in society, and her past is often overlooked. So that's so key. When we first started the shelter program, we were encouraging a lot of the young women to go into vocational training. So it would be things like, becoming a seamstress or a hairstylist, things that were within their grasp, so we thought. But over the years, we learned that Vietnamese women are very strong, no matter what traumas or difficulties they've gone through. And so now the program has evolved to include women and girls who we've sent now to university. We have 2 girls who just graduated from nursing school. We have one who's in her 3rd year of social work university. We have 3 more who are finishing their studies to be preschool teachers. So we're really encouraging them to be career women as opposed to just vocational women. So success stories. So I just mentioned some of our success stories. So the women and girls who are finishing nursing school, finishing preschool school to be preschool teachers. I just met up with our student who is in her 3rd year at the Social Work University in Hanoi. And she's super excited because in a couple months' time, she'll be starting her internship. And she's excited because she's chosen to specialize in human trafficking and go back and do her internship at our shelter in Lao Cai. And I asked her why she wanted to do it, and she was very excited. And she said, oh, because she misses home, she considers it, and also because she said it's her dream to be able to work with other trafficking survivors and show them and let them know that their life isn't over because this happened to them. And she says she can't wait to do this. So we're very, very excited. After she's done with school, she wants to go back into her own community. She's Hmong, and work with the community there to help prevent trafficking and also support survivors who have returned and reduce the stigma against trafficking survivors within the Hmong community. I just also met with another young woman who finished her schooling with KOTO, which is an Australian NGO that we work with that provides hospitality and tourism training to disadvantaged kids. And after 2 years, the students in the program received a diploma from, I think it's the Australian Institute of Travel and Tourism. We also partner with another similar program in Hoi An called Streets International, which is the American version of KOTO. And so the diploma comes from the American Culinary and Travel and Tourism Institute. So this young woman that I met with in KOTO, I've known her now for about 4 years. And we just helped her get a job placement in the kitchens at the Sofitel Metropole in Hanoi, which is the nicest hotel in all of Vietnam. And her dream is to be a pastry chef. And it's fantastic because they have now put her in the pastry chef training program at the Sofitel Metropole, which is going to launch her career. It's amazing. And I'm so happy for her because I met her, came into our shelter when she couldn't even speak Vietnamese because she'd been in China for so long. She was fluent in Mandarin and could only speak a little bit of Hmong. In the 4 years that she's been with us, she was able to learn Vietnamese, go to school, get into KOTO, graduate, and now she's on her way to being a French pastry chef. So we're super happy for her. And then we also have another young woman who is in her final year of high school and who was a top student in her class for science and math. And her dream is to become a doctor, and I think she can do it. I really honestly think that she can get into medical school in Vietnam, which is very hard. She just competed her in the all-city math tournament, which is invite only in Lao Cai. So they only invite the top 30 math students in the entire city to compete in this tournament. And she had a very difficult time as well because she was trafficked to China for about 4 years from the time she was 15 and forced to marry.
So Mimi was just saying that in the next slide is the young woman that she's talking about.
To
So this is the young woman that is dreaming to go to med school. So you can see here that she was trafficked at a really young age, at 16, when she was sold to be a bride in China. And while she was there, about the 4 years while she was there, she gave birth to a baby girl. And so she was able to escape. When she found that chance to escape, she had to make the choice. Like, would she leave with her daughter or leave her daughter behind? She made the difficult decision that she had to leave her daughter behind, because then it will help her have a better chances of escaping and succeeding. So, like what Mimi said, we're really, really proud of this young woman, and we have high hopes for her, as she does for herself as well. And you can see here that in this particular story and other stories that Mimi shared with us, they have a lot of potential, and they're really, really strong young women. And you know, this trafficking is something that happened to them, but for them, that's not what only defines them. For them, there's a whole future ahead of them, and you can see that a lot of them are doing very well in terms of carving out a successful future for themselves. So in the next slide for the proposal, so everyone, each of you here, and we are so appreciative of your support. A lot of your support will be going towards our reintegration program, and that will help a lot of the similar young women that we're helping, that we talked about just now. So helping them have their own success stories. We are also asking for support for a retreat, so all our current and former residents can come join together, and as a way for us to check in on them and see how they're doing, but also support one another. It will also support the initial RISE care packages that Mimi talked about, as well as the training for the border guards. And then also one of our prevention elements, the outreach events at the markets. This is really key too. It also gives more community support, and so that if people need help, they can refer to us, or they can just ultimately stay safe. And if you're wondering how you want to get involved, and we'll be happy to have you, there's various ways to get involved. It can be volunteers in Vietnam or based here in the US. It could be a virtual volunteer as well. Our office is in the San Francisco Bay Area. We need volunteers from teaching English to leading workshops at the summer camp, helping with the retreat. It could also be a skill that you already have that you enjoy doing. Like, we always need help with video editing, for example. Maybe it's translation that you can help with. So at the end of the day, normally what I do, I work with a lot of the volunteers, is that we'll have a conversation, and then you tell me what skills you can bring to the table, and then we can connect and see where the need is at Pacific Links Foundation, and then we can set up an opportunity. It doesn't have to be something that you don't know how to do. A lot of times you already have something that you can bring that we need support with. Another opportunity is serving as mentors for our youth leaders in the ADAPT clubs. Also, we need help spreading the message and awareness about our organization, what we're doing, the issue of human trafficking, so hosting events or campaigns. Also, if you want to have we also work with 2 other organizations. VA helps us place long-term volunteers in Vietnam, and it's a 1-year placement. So if you want to do something, they give extra support to volunteers. We also work with another organization called Cash, and they offer online courses about how to be a more knowledgeable volunteer, so that when you're in Vietnam doing work, you're more cognizant about the communities and your impact and what you're doing. So we like working with other organizations that place volunteers, because they can give you support as a volunteer that's outside from us as an organization. But we also welcome you to volunteer with us in without those organizations as well. And it's ultimately up to you and what most fits your situation.
Thank you, Diane. And now we will have one of our CPP campaign team members, Lillian Trin. She will explain another way of how you can get involved through One Step Away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lillian Trin, and I'm also on CPP Campaign. I'm from UVSA South. I'm here to talk about an active campaign that CPP is doing in order to raise money for the Pacific Links Foundation. The One Step Away campaign was really created around the idea that a lot of these victims, their journey back home was very physical. As Mimi said earlier, often these victims aren't adequately clothed. They often don't have adequate footwear, and they have to escape from their traffickers in really harsh conditions. So when they do arrive at the border, something that Pacific Links does to help them regain their dignity and help them rebuild their lives is present them with care packages with things such as clothes and shoes and other common necessities. So the One Step Away campaign is a fitness challenge campaign where individuals can essentially walk a certain distance in order to earn money from donors that they find in their community. So for instance, if I asked Diane if she would donate $20 to my campaign, then we would come to an agreement and I would say, okay, I'm going to walk 1 mile, or I'm going to walk 10 miles. And for every mile that I walk, I will have earned $2 of her donation. Once I have completed the set amount of miles that I chose to walk to earn that donation, I will take a screenshot of how I tracked it and I will post it on social media. And we have a lot more information on the UNAVSA Facebook page, such as the registration link and everything. And if you do sign up, we will send you an infographic that has all the information of how to donate, how it works, tips and tricks. And also, it should be noted that it is not constrained to just walking. You're welcome to do any form of exercise and figure out a way to sort of track it and keep yourself accountable. We are also doing 2 scholarships to UNAVSA for 2 individuals who either raise the most money or they go the furthest trackable distance. So let's say I was the individual who walked the furthest distance and I posted all of my screenshots on Facebook and they were trackable, then the CPP campaign team would be able to add those up and find the person who walked the furthest distance. Or if you have the most donations under your name that we can track, then you would also get a funded scholarship for your registration. There are some terms and conditions that apply, so please be sure to register so that you can get more information. And the campaign runs from February 12th all the way to March 13th, and it closes at 11:59 Pacific Standard Time. If you need any more information, please feel free to reach out to CPP Campaign, myself, or anybody on UNAVSA eBoard, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Back to you, Tao.
Thank you, Lillian. And now we will go to Mimi on the impact of Pacific Links.
Hi, sorry there, I lost internet for a bit. So in the, oh gosh, how long is it now? 17 years that we've been in existence. We've managed to reach a lot of people. So our impact is at least over 50,000 individuals, although I think hopefully the impact is even greater than that, but this is direct impact. We've already offered over 8,000 rounds of scholarships. So each year we supply scholarships to more and more students. We have almost 300 students participating in our after school ADAPT clubs, or this is our leadership clubs. So hopefully developing the next generation of young leaders in Vietnam. We've helped over 800 young women with vocational training and job placement to help them become financially independent and stable and support their families. We've trained over 21,000 factory workers and managers across the country in Vietnam, and hopefully this year in 2018 we'll be doubling that amount. And we've worked We've done outreach, 20,000 community members across Vietnam in all the regions, in the mountain areas, the border regions, in schools, factories, bus stations, markets. We've trained over 100 first responders, and we've supported over 800 trafficking survivors in reintegration services.
That wraps up our presentation for tonight on Pacific Links Foundation, our programs and our work. And then we'll open up to Q&A in a little bit. And again, Mimi and I would definitely want to express how appreciative we are for this opportunity to share more about what we do, and also to really thank you for the support that you're giving to contribute to our work. So please feel free to connect with us, say hello, and then now back to Tao.
Thank you, Diane and Mimi. Now we will be moving on to our Q&A session of the webinar. So over the course of the webinar, we've been collecting questions through our live chat box, and now I will hand it over to Jen for the live questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Tao. So now we're going to start the Q&A session. We did receive a few questions leading up to this webinar. So if any of you do have any questions that come up, feel free to leave it in the live chat on the YouTube, and hopefully we'll have time to address it. But otherwise, like Diane mentioned, they do have contact information, so you're always more than welcome to reach out directly to Pacific Links Foundation as well as our CPP campaign team. Okay, so our first question of the night is, what is the biggest obstacle that you have faced as an organization towards achieving your goals?
Diane, do you want to? Oh, I can take that. So for lots of obstacles. This is a challenging issue, and we work in very challenging environments. Practically speaking, the biggest obstacle would be the lack of resources. And it's not just financial, but also manpower, because the situation in Vietnam is so specific. And our work spans not just working with law enforcement or the government, but also with the grassroots people. We are changing behavior. We are changing minds. We are changing thousands of years of Confucius ideology and beliefs. And it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of persistence and motivation to be able to keep doing this. And so it's finding not just the financial support, but also the people, the manpower who are passionate and engaged and are willing to go to the most remote areas of Vietnam and work with the people and explain to them how and why they should, keep their kids safe, or why they should go abroad, and basically help themselves and their families, and keep Vietnam safe and growing.
And something I'd like to add to that for people is that we are a development organization. So the results is not as tangible. Let's say if you're building a school, you can see that the schools are being built or building wells. So these are long-term changes that we're going after. So sometimes for a donor or other people, sometimes it's difficult to imagine the impact in the future. So that's something that is another obstacle, just getting people to understand the changes that we're going after, and that is long-term.
This is an issue of development. I always get asked, oh, again, do you guys rescue? Why don't you rescue? And rescuing is, number one, it's dangerous. Number two, that's the police's job. We work with the police, we train the police, but we don't take the work of the police. What we want is to not have to do this anymore. Any NGO, its goal should be to put itself out of business. And by putting itself out of business, meaning changing the conditions and changing the status quo to the point where we're no longer needed because the problem has been solved, or because if you're working overseas like us, the local people, the local environment, the local communities are built up. Their capacity is built up to the level that they have the expertise and the manpower and the willpower to do this work. Vietnam, our goal has always been to make sure that Vietnam develops as well as possible. And the country and its people can't be a properly developed country if they're still relying on outside help to solve their problems. And so part of our work is also helping to develop the capacity of our local colleagues, because they are the future of this kind of work in Vietnam, not us.
Okay, thank you so much. So the next question that we have is being trafficked specific to one gender? Are there any statistics that you could provide around males being trafficked? And is there any, I guess, involvement or stories that you might have as Pacific Links Foundation?
Sorry, can you say that again? I just cut out.
Oh, yeah. So is being trafficked specific to one gender? Do you happen to have any statistics around males being trafficked, and I guess any stories that you might have from your experience as Pacific Links Foundation?
So gender is one of the 5 vulnerability factors that increases someone's risk of being trafficked. What is unique to Vietnam, and I haven't seen this in a lot of other countries that also have high trafficking risk profiles, is the gender split. So within Asia region, it's as expected, most of the victims are women and girls, about 80%, and mostly trafficked for sex and some labor, but between China, Malaysia, and Cambodia, most of it is for sex trafficking. However, because Vietnam has this very odd position of being #1 for child trafficking victims in the UK and #2 for adults, and I say odd because we're far away from the UK and Europe. We're not a former colony. If anything, it should be France, right? Not the UK. But the fact that we are #1 for child trafficking victims and #2 for adults is unique. And on top of that, there is a marked gender split. It's about 65% men and boys versus 35% women and girls. And the trafficking into the UK is majority for forced labor, enslavement in cannabis grow houses or marijuana grow houses, and also in nail salons. So for the men and boys who get trafficked there, it's there's usually, for the men at least, there's usually not a sexual exploitation component. For the boys, sometimes there is, especially during their transit, meaning on their way from Vietnam into the UK. They cross over other countries such as Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Czech Republic, and France. And sometimes during the transit routes, they are sexually exploited. But for the most part, they're sent over to the UK for slave labor. For the women and girls who are sent over there, and this is true in general, there's always usually exploitation for sex and labor. And that's because the value of a woman in society is, and this is not specific to Vietnam, we have this problem in America as well. The value of a woman in society is usually less than that of a man. And this is reflected in the pay gap, for example. However, a woman's value on the market as a product or commodity is more than that of a man because she can be used for sex and labor. So her value is higher because, for example, if she gives birth to a son, she can then be resold to another family to continue to give birth. Or in the case of her victim that I mentioned earlier, she was, after giving birth to a child, she was then sold to a factory and for slave labor. So in terms of gender split, there is, depending on the destination country, and there also is a gender split on the types of trafficking that they're sold for.
Okay. So the next question comes from our live chat, and this is also somewhat directed to you, Diane. So
Okay.
how long do volunteers usually stay on board, and do most of them end up working for Pacific Links Foundation, like you, Diane?
It varies. We see volunteers, some volunteer, like let's say, for example, the ones that volunteer in Vietnam, they might volunteer for 6 months, a year, and then they move on to their next, life milestone that they need to go on. And then we also have volunteers that, will start out more intense, and they'll stick on and help us as needed. So we see volunteers that have been helping for years, and volunteers that have like a short-term project with us. And it very varies depending on the person and what their abilities are. Sometimes they might have more time and can give more time, and sometimes they have less time, so they'll give less time. But and we do have had volunteers who become staff. Like I know some of the volunteer people that we have on our team in Vietnam, some of them were previously volunteers, and that's how they learned about Pacific Links. And when there's job opportunities that came up, and they applied. We also have had part of the success stories with the trafficking survivors, as some of them have also, and also other beneficiaries in the program, some of them have also come back as volunteers to help out, other people that were in their shoes. And we've also had people become interns, and sometimes they also end up working for us as well. So depending on the person, some of their engagement has been a really long engagement. The friend that had introduced me to Pacific Links Foundation, she still is a volunteer for us as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Diane, for answering that question. So we do have time for one last question. So, either of you can answer this. So in your experience working, as Pacific Links Foundation, what do you feel is, I guess, the most effective practice, or I guess initiative that Pacific Links does in terms of helping trafficking survivors reintegrate into the compassion homes?
Sorry, I got cut out again. The internet's really bad right now. Sorry.
It's okay. So the question is, from your experience as Pacific Links Foundation, what would you say is the most effective, or has been proven effective practice to help trafficking survivors reintegrate in the compassion homes?
So it's not just one thing. It has to be comprehensive. There's no magic bullet, and it's a consistent, sustained effort on our parts to support these girls. It's constant hand-holding. It's constant motivation. It's constant. We become their chiefs, essentially, and they are our AMs. We become their second families. Their success is our success. Their lows are our lows. And it's very difficult not to become emotionally involved in their lives, because you just want them to do well, knowing everything that they've been through. So, they need everything. They have to have proper health care. They need to focus on their futures, which in Vietnam, that means education. So, but it's not just about going to school. It's about also keeping their own self-esteem and their self-confidence up. And they're not just trafficking survivors. We can't forget that they're also teenage girls. And on top of that, they're ethnic minority, which is already a different situation in Vietnam. And so they have a lot of quote unquote strikes against them. And so we constantly have to reassure them and make sure that they know that we are behind them no matter what, 1000%. And that whatever, difficulties they face, it's nothing compared to what they've been through already. And that they're so strong. And I always tell them this. I always tell them, you're so much stronger than you think you are. I was up at our shelter in Lao Cai in October, and I was talking to the social workers, and they had told me that the young woman who wants to go to medical school, that she was thinking of not going anymore. So I pulled her aside and I was like, Am, what's going on? Like, I thought you wanted to be a doctor, and if you don't, because they said that she wanted to be a teacher now, and that's great, teacher. But if you can be a doctor, let's try this. But I said to her, if this is your dream to be a doctor, I'm going to stop talking. Be a teacher, I'm going to stop talking. But I thought you wanted to be a doctor. so what's going on? And she said, oh, I do, but the kids who are smartest say that the test, they're afraid of the entrance exam, that they can't pass it. So if those kids can't pass it, then what chance do I have? And this is a very, Asian Vietnamese thing to do, is that if you don't think you can pass it or you won't be successful, you back off and you take the easier route. And, I had to say to her, I was like, okay, this is your dream. And you are #1 student in your class in physics, biology, and chemistry. On top of that, I just found out that she was invited to take place in this math tournament. And so we just, we had to give her a pep talk a bit of a pep talk and say, explain to her, this entrance exam is the hardest thing that your classmates will ever have encountered in their, 17 years. You have been through more and survived more than what any of us will ever go through in our entire lives. And not only that, you were doing so well and thriving beyond it. Like and at the end, of the pep talk, she was like, okay, she's like, I can do this. But her real problem was that the teachers in our science classes weren't as good as her teachers last year. So I said, okay, so that's the problem. So that's a problem that we can solve, beyond just giving her a pep talk of motivation. So what we were able to do was get her extra tutoring in the subjects where she felt that the teachers weren't as good, so that she would be better prepared for the entrance exams, which take place in May or June. So, it's keeping their spirits up. It's making sure that, they know that they're strong and that we're behind them. And if they take a stumble, it's okay, because it's not the end of the world. They face so many things that would be the end of the world for every single other person. And they're still, alive and kicking. So, let's just find practical solutions to keep going forward and keep our eye on the prize, which in this case for this young woman is medical school. So. Oh, and one more thing I would add is that once they leave our shelter, our support doesn't stop. So I had mentioned earlier the young woman who is now training to be a pastry chef. She left our program 2.5 years ago, but we still check in on her and all the other young women who are living in Hanoi right now. We still, every time I go up there, I still meet them for coffee or for lunch and make sure that they have everything that they need, to make sure that they need, Tiger Sister pep talk, to make sure that, if when the time comes for them to find work or, work on their CVs, we're there. We edit, we help, them with their interviewing, we coach them on that, we pull strings if needed. She got into the training program at the Sofitel Metropole because I'm friends with the general manager, and they were able to open up a spot for her. So we do everything we can to make sure and see through these girls' futures, to make sure that they succeed. And like I said, they become family. We become their families. We go to their weddings. We, when they have babies, after they get married, they come by the shelter and, show off their new families to all the social workers and the house mother. So it's, you don't abandon your family.
Okay, thank you so much. So that concludes the Q&A portion. So now I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Tao.
Thank you, Jen. All right, that actually concludes the end of our CPP webinar. On behalf of the CPP campaign team and UNAVSA, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today, and also thank you to Diane and Mimi for presenting an amazing webinar. We hope everybody who is watching has learned a little bit more about the Pacific Links Foundation from them and on their efforts to end human trafficking through their various programs. Diane, Mimi, would you like to give a goodbye message?
The message I want to leave everybody with is that, I always say that you can do something, and anything that you do, it helps. So anything, like I've seen really amazing campaigns that all the various VSAs are doing, and they've been all very creative. And, ultimately at the end of the day, whatever we can do to help, help one more trafficking survivor, help one more at-risk youth, it really makes a difference.
And also, I'm so happy that we're working with VSA, UNAVSA, and CPP, and just the students, because I think for you guys, and this is how it is in Vietnam as well, like the youth are really our future. I've been doing this work now for a number of years. Diane's been doing this for a number of years, and we can't be doing this forever. And this is a problem, I think, that will continue in different forms. But every word, every thought, every action helps. This is not an issue that can be solved by one group or one person alone. It takes everyone's involvement, whether it's just spreading the word or, not just it, or fundraising, or coming to Vietnam and volunteering for us and visiting the projects and, working with the people directly who we're trying to help, engaging with the community. You guys are really the bridge, because you're VQ. You know the culture. In a lot of cases, you know the language, and we have a special role to play in the development of Vietnam.
All right, thank you, Diane and Mimi. And once again, I would like to thank you all again for joining us this evening, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you so much.